My family always believed my military career was nothing but a sad detour, a fallback for people who couldn't cut it in the real world. They were wrong, because the day I walked into my father's boardroom wearing a full colonel's uniform, they finally understood who they'd spent years underestimating. If you've ever been underestimated by your family, by colleagues, by people who swore they knew what you were capable of, subscribe right now. Like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because trust me, vindication is one of life's sweetest tastes. And this story, it proves justice isn't always about vengeance. Sometimes it's about standing your ground with such quiet power, the world can't help but pay attention. My name is Natalie Williams. I'm 28 years old, a full colonel in the Army, specializing in cyber defense. But none of that mattered as I pulled into the cracked driveway of my childhood home in Montana. I sat there for a minute, palms sweating against the wheel. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I'd last walked through that door. The house hadn't changed. Same faded family portraits lining the hallway. Same dusty scent of old carpet. Same furniture that my mother refused to replace, almost as if she was preserving her own personal museum, a shrine to the life she imagined for us. My mother's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Natalie, you made it. Your brother will be here soon. He's just been promoted again, senior project manager now." Her pride was a dagger sheathed in every syllable. I wandered to the living room, trailing my fingers along outdated doilies and coasters, every surface cluttered with Gregory's framed certificates. Meanwhile, none of my military promotions had ever earned a space on these shelves. Upstairs, my old bedroom was a frozen echo of who I used to be. High school cheer trophies, college acceptance letters to business schools I never attended. A whole wall of potential, carefully curated before I made the disappointing choice, at least to them, to join ROTC. I still remember sitting at that same dinner table years ago, nervously explaining how ROTC would pay for college, how I wanted to serve. My father's face had contorted like I'd announced plans to join a traveling circus. "Natalie, the military is for people who can't get real jobs. You're smarter than that. Pinnacle could be your future." They'd always imagined me following him into corporate security at Pinnacle Defense Systems, where he'd spent 3 decades clawing up to senior executive. But I had different ambitions. "It is a real job," I'd said quietly. "It's what I want." From then on, my life was a series of polite nods, half-hearted congratulations, and veiled sighs. My military career? Reduced to an awkward footnote they never really asked about. That evening was no different. My brother Gregory arrived with his wife Megan, both dressed in a way that screamed polished corporate success. "So, tell us about the new project, dear." My mother beamed at him. Gregory puffed up. "Shannon Murphy personally chose me to lead the team. It's the same project Pinnacle's been developing for years, but she says my fresh perspective will fast-track things." Shannon Murphy, the elusive CEO. Even I had only spoken to her over secure calls. I simply nodded, fighting the urge to smirk. Because what they didn't know was that the project he was bragging about was the $1.2 billion Army contract I'd been assigned to oversee. My father leaned back, half listening, until he said with casual arrogance, "Some colonel from the Pentagon's coming tomorrow, but it's probably just a major or something. They'll be impressed by our operations." I nearly laughed into my water glass. Then Gregory added, "Military people just follow orders. They don't innovate. Real challenge is out here, in the market." My mother actually nodded. "That's why it was such a disappointment, Natalie. Remember how your teachers said you could run a company someday?" I swallowed the bitterness, staring at my hands. They had no clue that by this time tomorrow, I'd be the one holding their futures in the palm of my hand. Later that night, I sat cross-legged on my childhood bed, uniform laid out before me like holy robes. Midnight blue, silver eagle insignias that had been pinned on me only 3 weeks ago by General Eleanor Grant, my first mentor. "Youngest colonel in Cyber Command history," she'd said. "Wear it knowing you earned every single thread." Unlike my family's polished illusions, these ranks weren't handed out over conference cocktails. They were carved by years of deployments, 14-hour days, threats that didn't make the news. When a major breach attempt nearly compromised hundreds of classified systems 2 years ago, it was my team that uncovered it. My strategy that stopped it. My after-action report that rewrote national defense protocols. Tomorrow, I'd walk into Pinnacle not as the insecure daughter they pitied, but as the primary military authority on the contract that could decide the future of their company. I didn't rehearse speeches about revenge. That was too small, too petty. My goal was simple. Be so thoroughly, calmly competent that the old narrative they'd clung to, that I was a disappointment, would collapse under its own weight. I packed my uniform meticulously, checking every pin, reviewed the contract slides for the 100th time, made sure my technical questions for the team were pointed, unavoidable, but fair, because this wasn't about humiliating Gregory. It was about protecting a national security project that demanded precision. If, along the way, my family discovered who I really was, that was just a side effect, a necessary reckoning. The next morning, I pulled into the reserved spot marked Military Liaison, Pentagon Authorization Required. The guard snapped to attention. "Good morning, Colonel. ID, please." When he saw my credentials, his eyes widened. "Ma'am, welcome. You're expected in the executive suite." As I walked through the glass doors of Pinnacle Defense Systems, people stopped mid-conversation. Some glanced at my eagles, others simply stared. Young, female, colonel. It didn't add up in their heads, and that suited me just fine. I stepped out of the elevator on the executive floor and nearly collided with Gregory. His eyes dropped to my rank insignia, then snapped back up, confusion twisting into something close to panic. "Natalie, why are you— What are you wearing?" Before I could answer, my father rounded the corner, deep in conversation with two senior managers. His jaw literally dropped. "Natalie, what's going on? Why are you in uniform here?" "Good morning, Dad," I said evenly. "I'm just heading into the conference room. I believe the project review starts in 20 minutes. The executives beside him stiffened, eyes darting between us. One of them whispered, "Colonel Williams, as in our Colonel Williams?" My father's face blanched. In the conference room, CEO Shannon Murphy entered with her entourage. She spotted me immediately, her face breaking into a pleased smile. "Colonel Williams, I thought this would be a video briefing." What an excellent surprise. She shook my hand firmly. For those unaware, Colonel Williams is our Pentagon liaison for Project Aegis. She has final approval authority on all technical specifications and budget allocations. Gregory actually let out a soft, strangled noise. My father's mouth opened and closed, no words coming. Over the next hour, department heads gave updates. Every technical query or cyber risk question, they deferred to me. When Gregory nervously began presenting his team's interface proposal, I listened politely, then asked 3 probing questions that exposed major oversights. Not out of malice, out of duty. "I'll need revised specs by the end of the week," I told him calmly. Watching my brother nod, face pale, was surreal. For the first time, my family saw me not as Natalie the wayward daughter, but as Colonel Williams, the final word on a billion-dollar defense project. When the meeting adjourned, Shannon clapped me on the shoulder. "Colonel, your expertise today was invaluable. We're lucky to have you on this." From across the room, my father finally looked at me. Really looked at me. And his eyes held something like awe. Outside, I stood by the reflecting pool, watching ripples distort the mirrored glass of the building. My father approached hesitantly. "Natalie, we never realized. Your mother and I, we thought." "You thought I was throwing my life away?" I finished for him gently. He nodded, throat working. "You've done more, become more than we ever imagined." I didn't offer absolution. That wasn't what this was about. Instead, I simply said, "I know, I always did." We stood there, silent, the power imbalance of our past undone by quiet truth. Later, as I drove away, the weight on my chest felt strangely lighter. Vindication isn't about crushing someone. It's about no longer needing their approval to validate your worth. My life was bigger than their expectations. Richer, harder, more meaningful. And it was mine. Earned through grit, discipline, and the courage to stand alone. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have championed you most, remember, you don't need to prove them wrong. You only need to keep becoming exactly who you're meant to be. Eventually, reality does the explaining for you. Have you ever been dismissed by your own family or colleagues, only to later watch them scramble to comprehend who you'd become? Drop your story in the comments. I'd genuinely love to read it. And if you want more powerful narratives of revenge, vindication, betrayal, and finding the strength to stand your ground, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Because justice doesn't just arrive. Sometimes it walks in wearing a uniform and leaves an entire boardroom speechless.